Hi guys. The other week I worked on the scenics for the incline and said that that wasn't the complete look. Well, this week I'm going to work on the details, which means it's still not complete as I still don't have trees. However, it's another solid step in the right direction. Nant Gwernal these days is simply a tourist stop at the end of the line, with walks up and around the old quarries. Which means I need some sign to tell the little people where to go. And by that I mean scale figures, not just children. These are the final signs on my sheet that I put together a few months back. And like I mentioned back then, I printed these in a selection of sizes so I could handpick the most suitable one for the layout. These did need a fair bit of editing, as the real signs had a lot of plant growth in front of them when I took the photo, so I needed to remove all of that just for the sign itself. Oh, and I always print this type of thing with a matte finish, no gloss here, tar. I'm going to start by choosing the one that looks close enough. I'm not going to actually cut it out tidy just yet, I just want it free from the sheet to check it on the layout. Oh, ignore my blue nail. Sometimes with toddlers it's all about haggling for the best deal. I didn't want painted nails, but she wanted me to have painted nails. So I've got a painted nail. Anyway, this sign looks good on the layout, but it's too large for the scale, so I'll swap it out and cut out the next size down on the sheet. To be fair, if I actually measured the sign, I could have scaled it properly on the computer, which would have saved ink, but I don't know how to do that, and it wasn't my printer. Now I've got the correct size, I can actually cut it out properly. My idea with this sign is to cut it into separate boards, so light can pass between them, which will look so much better than just a picture of the background between the boards. I decided to back the signs onto thin plasticard, which will both help keep the sign in their shape and not warp over time, and thicken them up when seen from the side. Rocket card glue is designed for jobs just like this, and my gosh does it stick. When the glue's dry, the piece can now be properly cut out. These signs are made up from a number of individual boards, which means making them up is a bit more time consuming over a traditional looking board. I've backed them onto plain white plasticard, and these now need to be painted in some sort of sign looking colour, grey in this case. I didn't bother priming them, as once they're on the layout, they'll be left alone with no one touching them, so they don't exactly need to be durable. I'll be using square strip styrene for the posts, and like the fence posts in last week's video, I've decided the best course of action for these was to paint it up in a complete strip, and then cut out what I need from that for the signs after. The tips of these posts need to be cut to suit the angle at the top of the sign, which slants to the right. Happy with that, I'll start to glue it all together. I'm using the grid lines on the cutting mat below the piece to get it all nice and straight edge. And to be fair, when the top one's on and at a good 90-degree angle to the post, the rest will quickly follow, making sure to leave a little gap of course. And now I can add the second post. Ignore the back of the signs, it's only their first coat of paint at this point. It'll look much better when I'm done with it, hopefully. Ah, there we go, look, a second coat going on. In fact, at this point I've started mixing a little bit of brown into the grey coat to wear it down a bit. It's a subtle difference to the first, but I'm all about that sort of thing apparently. And it'll get a more brown third coat as weathering just now in a minute. And in true Art Attack style, here's one I made earlier. This is a second set of signposts for the different walks up the hills there. All done in the same way as the one I showed you just then, and the dirtier posts here are now pretty clear to see. You'll also note how long the posts are. This was intentional so I could plant them in the hillside, which should help it if it ever gets knocked. I'll use a pin drill to get me some nice little post size holes. If you follow me on Instagram, where I happen to put photos very rarely sometimes, you would have seen a photo of these signs in these location holes. But once someone posted a photo of the real thing to compare, I decided to move mine accordingly, so I didn't tear at my skin every time I saw the layout and knew that they were a couple of mil to the left of where they should be. But my skin's safe, because I fixed it. Okay, that's the signs done, but that's not the lot, as these steps need a banister up the side to protect people from, well, slipping down a very slight bank. Health and safety in miniature. The banister rail is half circle, and luckily I have that in my styrene supply drawer. There are 2 rails to make, one for the stairs and one for along the rear of the demo piece of the incline track. This is yet again something I forgot to measure the height of, so instead I'll use a Model U figure, and the average height of a handrail to get this one correct. You know, until I visit and actually measure it again, and change it on the layout. Anyway, ignoring the slight family shame I'm gonna get when I use the random height for the handrails, I'm using square styrene for the posts. And I decided to only keep one of the 3 posts longer to sink into the ground, and the remaining 2 can just get glued into the surface. As with the signs, the cut and mat guides are used for post gluing. It can be tricky, as the glue is pretty good at gluing the post to the mat itself, which I hate. The pair of rails can then get primed in primer. With me wearing a glove, might I add. Before getting coated in earth brown. Again, well done me with the glove. Weathering is pretty much a given at this stage, and a dry brushing with an off-white will bring some age and sun bleach into the woody pieces. It's pretty fiddly with delicate parts such as this, so it's important not to rush it. And I did rush it, and I broke it, and then I fixed it to cover my tracks. The handrails can get holes in the ground like the signs before them. These need to be pretty much exactly right, because if they're not, they'll easily bend the plastic rails. And here's my trusty Model U figure to size up the height of the rails. He looks happy. One last part to make this week is a little bit of slate fencing. This slate actually sits under the wooden handrails. Someone referred to my modelling this week as hyper detailing, which I like. In reality though, Nangwernal is mostly foliage, so what detail there is I really need to make, as it would be obvious if it was missing. That's just logic, isn't it? No, probably not. Normal for me though. The slates are cut from thin sheets of plasticard. I started cutting just random pieces, until I realised that there was only a handful of slates. So I might as well make each unique slab for the layout. There's that classic logic again. To paint these, I'm using my technique for the slate fence on the Corish build, which is to stick them to masking tape, which stops them from flying away when I spray them. This makes painting them so easy, and I'm so glad I've watched my own videos for tips like this. I'm giving them a base coat of grey primer. And then I'll paint over them in slate grey, which is slightly darker than grey primer. And, if it's added fairly lightly, it gives nice streaks and changes to the surface of the slate. The slabs are then dry brushed at an angle with white. This picks up the edges and gives yet more surface detail, which is good for what is essentially perfectly flat plasticard. I do vary the angle though, so the slabs aren't all uniform. And now comes the fun part. If you find planting miniature slabs of slate in a really tricky and delicate spot on the layout fun, well, my hand's up. A drop of super gel on their base is all that's needed here. Well, that and a steady hand. At least I've got the super gel. And yes, I'm planting them in the correct order as per my reference photo. And yes, I was happy with myself when I got to the end and I planted the correct amount of slabs. Quite smug I was that evening. You may have also spotted how these slates aren't even at an even height, even though they were when they were cut from the same strip of plasticard. That's because I've been cutting the bottoms depending on the individual slab in the photo. It's easy to see how someone may spiral into madness, fear and obsession when you really get stuck into something like cutting slate slabs. Anyway, the glue's all dry, so everything today gets a weathering. I'm not actually happy with this. This is black ink wash, made by Miniature Paints, and yes, that is the earth brown, guys. I thought it would speed things up if I used it on scenery instead of mixing my own, but I think the finish is too black, whereas the black poster paint washer makeup leaves it more dirty than black. Okay, well that's it for the detail on this part of the layout. How are you guys feeling about the look I'm getting with the scenery so far? I said at the start of this build that I've never done autumn before, and a lot of autumnal layouts seem very New York with bright orange, yellows and reds, which doesn't quite happen here in Wales. It's more dull and muddy, so I'm hoping that's really coming across at this point. Obviously there's a lot more to do, like 90% of the layout, but I'm pretty happy with the look so far. Okie dokie, no time to stop for a drink. I need to fire up my stream making skills for next week's video. Best get my waders on. Cheers.